The hum of applause still echoed in my ears as I pulled into the driveway of our suburban home. Tonight had been one of my biggest career milestones, delivering a keynote speech at a national conference. My words met with standing ovations and handshakes from CEOs. But as I turned off the ignition and sat in the darkened car, staring at the warmly lit windows of my house, a strange emptiness washed over me. I shook it off. This was my sanctuary. Inside were my wife, Melissa, and our 3 kids, my reason for everything I worked so hard for. The house was an extension of me, orderly, strong, and meticulously cared for, much like the life we'd built together. Stepping inside, the familiar scent of Melissa's lavender diffuser greeted me, followed by the sound of laughter coming from the living room. My heart warmed. This was the life I'd fought for, a beautiful wife, healthy children, and a sense of security I never thought I'd achieve when I was younger. Daddy's home, my youngest, Ellie, squealed, sprinting toward me. Her little arms wrapped around my leg as her siblings followed, each taking turns for a hug. Melissa appeared in the doorway, her face lit by the flickering glow of the TV behind her. She was radiant as always, her blonde hair tied into a loose bun, her lips curling into a smile that could disarm anyone. "How was the big night?" she asked, her voice warm and honeyed. She walked over and kissed me softly on the cheek. "Great," I replied, holding her gaze. I wanted to tell her everything, the applause, the congratulations, but something in her expression was distant. I brushed it off. Melissa was busy with the kids all day, after all. Beneath the familial warmth, I noticed an odd detail. Bruno, our Labrador, sat at Melissa's feet, tail wagging furiously, his eyes fixed on her. He was always affectionate with her, but there was something different tonight. Melissa's hand absently stroked his head, her nails raking through his fur with a precision that felt too focused for a casual touch. "Dinner's in the oven," she said, breaking the spell. "But first, I was thinking we could have a chat after the kids go to bed. Just the 2 of us?" A pang of anxiety laced her words, though her tone remained light. My chest tightened, but I masked it with a nod. "Sure. Let me grab a quick shower first." As the evening wore on, the kids were tucked into bed, their giggles replaced by the soft hum of the baby monitor. Melissa poured 2 glasses of wine and gestured for me to join her at the dining table. "So, what's on your mind?" I asked, trying to sound casual as I sat down. Melissa swirled her wine, her eyes avoiding mine. "I've been talking to Dr. Keller," she began, her voice soft but calculated. "You know the therapist I told you about? She thinks it might be good for us to try expanding our horizons." "Expanding?" I asked, my brows knitting together. She leaned forward slightly, her smile too sweet, her words too rehearsed. "An open marriage." The words hit me like a freight train. The warmth of the house, the echoes of my children's laughter, all of it seemed to drain out of the room. "What?" I said, my voice sharper than I intended. "Melissa, where is this coming from?" "It's not what you think," she said quickly, her tone almost patronizing. "It's not about problems. It's about growth, about exploring what we're capable of as a couple. Dr. Keller thinks." "Dr. Keller?" I interrupted, my hands gripping the table. "You've been seeing her alone?" Melissa sighed, leaning back in her chair, as if I were the unreasonable one. "Eric, don't be defensive. This isn't an attack. It's about building something stronger. Stronger." The word echoed in my mind, mocking me. I stared at her, my pulse pounding. This wasn't the woman I married. Or was it? Had I just been too blind to see? And then, as if sensing my unease, Bruno padded over and placed his head in Melissa's lap. She smiled down at him, her fingers tangling in his fur. "See," she said, her voice oddly tender, almost dreamy. "It's about trust, like the trust Bruno has in us." Her words fell off, her gaze distant, and I couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that the woman across from me was slipping further away into some version of herself I didn't recognize. I sipped my wine, my throat tight, unsure whether I should press her further or let this madness play out. "Melissa," I finally said, "what else haven't you told me?" She looked at me, her smile soft but empty. "We'll talk more with Dr. Keller. You'll understand soon." The room grew colder. The life I thought I had started to unravel before my eyes. And somewhere deep down, I knew this was just the beginning. The night after Melissa's revelation was restless. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, while the weight of her words crushed the remnants of my composure. Melissa slept soundly beside me, her breathing even and peaceful, as though she hadn't just detonated a bomb in the middle of our marriage. An open marriage? Growth? The absurdity of it churned in my mind, alongside something deeper, more disquieting. That look she gave Bruno. That offhand comment about trust. Was I overreacting? Exhaustion finally took over, dragging me into a restless sleep filled with fractured dreams and shadowy whispers. The next morning, I went about my routine with the precision of someone trying to pretend everything was normal. Coffee brewed, lunches packed, kids kissed goodbye as they boarded the school bus. Melissa lingered in the doorway, sipping her tea and scrolling through her phone. Bruno sat loyally at her feet. "Don't forget, we have our session with Dr. Keller this afternoon," she reminded me, her tone light but firm, as if the events of last night hadn't left a crater in my chest. "I remember," I replied curtly, grabbing my keys. Her eyes followed me, but she didn't press further. The waiting room was modern and tastefully decorated, with muted tones and abstract art. A faint aroma of eucalyptus lingered in the air. I sat stiffly in the corner, my arms crossed while Melissa scrolled through her phone, unbothered. Dr. Keller, a slim woman with sharp eyes and a soothing voice, invited us into her office. She wore the kind of practiced smile that therapists perfected, the one meant to put you at ease but left me feeling cornered. "So, Eric," she began, after Melissa introduced the topic of relationship growth, "what are your initial thoughts on expanding the boundaries of your marriage?" "I think it's insane," I said bluntly, ignoring the flicker of disapproval in her eyes. "Melissa and I took vows. I don't see how bringing other people into our relationship strengthens anything." Dr. Keller nodded slowly, jotting something in her notebook. "I understand it can feel unconventional, but this isn't about breaking vows. It's about enhancing trust and communication. Exploring the limits of what your partnership can withstand." Exploring, I repeated bitterly. "And what happens when one of us doesn't want to explore?" Melissa placed her hand on mine, her touch light but insistent. "Eric, this isn't about forcing anything. It's about being honest with each other, about our needs, about who we really are, who we are." I pulled my hand away, glaring at her. "Melissa, do you even hear yourself?" Dr. Keller interjected, her tone calm and measured. "Eric, this resistance is normal. But sometimes resistance comes from fear, fear of change, fear of losing control. It's important to examine where that fear stems from." I clenched my jaw, my pulse pounding in my ears. They were circling me like wolves, painting me as the rigid, fearful one, the outsider. I wanted to shout, to tear apart the carefully orchestrated narrative they were weaving around me, but I knew I wouldn't win in this setting. Not yet. The session ended with no resolution, only a vague agreement to continue the conversation. By the time we got home, I was drained. Melissa, on the other hand, seemed almost energized, humming softly as she let Bruno outside. I watched from the kitchen window as she crouched next to him in the yard, her fingers combing through his fur with that same peculiar focus I'd seen the night before. She was cooing something to him, her voice too low for me to make out. Bruno wagged his tail, oblivious to the unease clawing at my chest. Later that evening, I found her in the bathroom with Bruno again. She was bathing him, meticulously scrubbing his fur. It wasn't unusual for her to bathe the dog. She loved keeping him clean. But this time, something felt different. Her hands lingered, her movements unnervingly precise. "Melissa," I said from the doorway, my voice tight, "you've been spending a lot of time with Bruno lately." She didn't look up, her focus entirely on the dog. "He's part of the family, Eric. He deserves care and attention." "I didn't say he didn't," I replied, stepping closer. "But this feels excessive." She finally turned to me, her expression unreadable. "Eric, why are you so tense? He's just a dog. Just a dog." The way she said it felt wrong, almost dismissive, like she was brushing off something far more significant. Bruno's eyes met mine, his tail wagging slowly, and for the first time, I felt a pang of something I couldn't explain. Pity? No, something darker. Something I wasn't ready to name. That night, as I lay awake in bed, the pieces began to shift in my mind. Melissa's growing detachment, her obsession with openness, her fixation on Bruno, the way she and Dr. Keller had cornered me in that session, like hunters closing in on prey. I didn't know where this path was leading, but I knew one thing. I had to start paying attention. The next few days passed in a haze of unease. Melissa's behavior became increasingly erratic, though she masked it well in front of the kids. To the outside world, she was still the charming, devoted wife and mother. But behind closed doors, there was an air of something unspoken, something festering. I began to notice her odd habits with Bruno more frequently. She'd wake up early to take him on unnecessarily long walks, sometimes before the sun rose. At first, I thought she just needed space to clear her mind, but then there was the bathing. Always bathing. 3 times a week, sometimes more. It wasn't normal. One evening, I came home late from work to find Melissa in the living room with Bruno. She didn't even glance up when I walked in. "Melissa," I said, dropping my bag by the door. "We need to talk." She looked up, finally, but her expression was distant, almost distracted. "What about?" "This fixation," I said, gesturing toward Bruno. "The walks, the baths, the constant attention. It's not normal." Her brow furrowed as if I'd insulted her. "Eric, he's part of the family. Why do you have a problem with me taking care of him?" "It's not about care," I shot back. "It's about whatever this is. It's excessive, and it's making me uncomfortable." She stared at me for a long moment, her hand resting on Bruno's head. Then she smiled, but it wasn't warm. It was cold, calculated. "Maybe it's you who has the problem, Eric. You've been so distant lately, so judgmental. Maybe if you focus less on criticizing me and more on improving yourself, we wouldn't need therapy." Her words cut deep, but I bit my tongue. I wasn't going to fall into her trap. I decided I needed answers. Late that night, while Melissa was asleep, I crept into her home office and opened her laptop. I wasn't proud of it, but my gut told me I wasn't going to find the truth any other way. Her browser history was carefully curated. Nothing unusual there. But in one folder, buried under a pile of innocuous documents, I found something chilling. A set of bookmarked forums. Pet enthusiast groups on the surface, but as I clicked through the pages, a sickening pattern began to emerge. These weren't normal forums. They were filled with discussions that blurred the lines between care and something far more disturbing. My stomach turned as I scrolled through the posts, realizing that Melissa wasn't just a member. She was an active participant. One post stood out, written by her under a pseudonym I immediately recognized. "Sometimes the bond you share with a pet can be stronger than with any human. People just don't understand." I slammed the laptop shut, my pulse hammering in my ears. I didn't want to believe it, but the evidence was undeniable. The next morning, I confronted her. She was in the kitchen, feeding Bruno scraps from her plate, when I walked in and dropped the laptop on the counter. "What the hell is this?" I demanded, my voice sharper than I intended. She glanced at the laptop and then back at me, her expression icy. "You went through my things? Don't turn this on me, Melissa. I want answers. What are you doing on these forums?" She crossed her arms, her chin lifting defiantly. "I'm connecting with people who understand. People who don't judge me for loving Bruno." "Loving?" The word came out like a hiss. "Melissa, this isn't love. It's obsession. And it's dangerous." Her eyes narrowed. "Dangerous? You don't know what you're talking about. Bruno is loyal. He's kind. He doesn't criticize me or make me feel small. Maybe you should learn something from him." The sheer audacity of her words left me speechless. For a moment, all I could do was stare at her, trying to reconcile the woman I married with the stranger standing in front of me. "This isn't normal, Melissa," I finally said, my voice low and firm. "You need help?" Her laugh was cold, almost unhinged. "Help? From who?" "You, Dr. Keller? Everyone just wants to control me, but I don't need fixing, Eric. You're the one who's broken." At that moment, I realized I wasn't going to get through to her. She was too far gone, trapped in whatever delusion had taken hold of her mind. But I wasn't going to let her drag me or the kids down with her. That night, I made a decision. I wasn't going to wait for things to spiral further out of control. I called a trusted attorney and laid out everything I discovered, from the forums to her erratic behavior. I also reached out to a psychologist, not Dr. Keller, but someone independent, to discuss the best way to protect my children. If Melissa wasn't going to face reality, then I would force her hand. For their sake. For mine. As I ended the call and looked out the window, I saw Melissa in the backyard with Bruno, her silhouette illuminated by the moonlight. She was crouched low, whispering something to him, her movements slow and deliberate. A chill ran down my spine. Whatever was happening here, it was only going to get worse. But I was ready now. I wasn't the man she thought she could control anymore. This was my family, my life, and I was going to take it back. The tension in the house had become unbearable. Melissa's behavior was no longer just unsettling. It was escalating into something I couldn't ignore. I kept my distance as much as possible, careful not to provoke her, but the strain of pretending everything was normal for the kids' sake was taking its toll. I spent most of my free time documenting everything. I kept notes, took pictures, and installed discrete cameras in common areas of the house. The footage was damning. Melissa's long, obsessive grooming sessions with Bruno, the way she seemed to whisper to him as though he were a confidant, the increasing neglect of the kids in favor of the dog. Each piece of evidence painted a clearer picture of her deteriorating mental state. One night, I came home late after a meeting with my lawyer. The house was dark except for a faint light spilling out from the bathroom. I heard the sound of running water and something else, Melissa's voice, low and melodic. My stomach churned. I approached the bathroom door quietly, peering inside. There she was, crouched by the tub, bathing Bruno again. Her hands moved slowly over him, her touch unnervingly tender. She was speaking to him in a soft, almost seductive tone. "You're the only one who understands me," she whispered. "The only one who's ever been loyal." My breath caught in my throat. I stepped back, my heart pounding, and made my way to the kitchen to steady myself. This wasn't just unhealthy. It was crossing into dangerous territory. I needed to act now. The next morning, after dropping the kids off at school, I confronted Melissa. She was sitting at the kitchen table, absently stroking Bruno's head as she scrolled through her phone. "We need to talk," I said, my voice firm. She looked up, her expression wary. "What now, Eric?" "I've been documenting your behavior," I said, cutting straight to the point. "Your obsession with Bruno, your neglect of the kids, everything." "Melissa, you need help?" Her eyes widened, and for a moment, I saw something that looked like fear. But it was quickly replaced by anger. "You've been spying on me," she hissed. "You're the one who needs help, Eric. You're paranoid, controlling, and you're losing control," I interrupted. "I've already spoken to an attorney. If you don't agree to get professional help, I'm filing for custody of the kids. You're not fit to care for them right now." Her face twisted into something I barely recognized. "You think you can take them from me? You're pathetic. You've always been pathetic." I held her gaze, refusing to let her words sink in. "This isn't about me, Melissa. It's about what's best for our children." She scoffed, pushing back her chair with a loud scrape. "Do whatever you want. You've already ruined everything anyway." The breaking point came just days later. I arrived home from work to find the kids huddled together in the living room, their faces pale and anxious. Ellie, the youngest, ran to me, tears streaming down her face. "Daddy," she sobbed, clutching my leg. "Mommy's acting weird again." She locked herself in the bathroom with Bruno. My blood ran cold. I gently pried Ellie off and hurried upstairs, the older kids trailing behind me. I knocked on the bathroom door, my heart racing. "Melissa!" I shouted. "Open the door!" No response. I jiggled the handle, but it was locked. Panic surged through me. I kicked the door open, the wood splintering under the force. What I saw made my stomach churn. Melissa was sitting on the bathroom floor, clutching Bruno tightly, her face streaked with tears. The dog whimpered, looking almost as frightened as I felt. She looked up at me, her eyes wild. "They'll never understand, Eric," she said, her voice trembling. "They'll never see how much he means to me." "Melissa," I said, stepping cautiously into the room, put the dog down. Please. She clutched Bruno tighter, shaking her head. No, he's all I have left. I could feel the kid's eyes on me from the hallway. I had to defuse the situation, calmly, carefully. It's okay, I said, my voice as steady as I could manage. We'll figure this out, but you need to let go of Bruno. After what felt like an eternity, she finally loosened her grip. Bruno scrambled out of her arms and bolted out of the room, his nails skittering against the hardwood floor. I moved closer to Melissa, my hand outstretched. I'm calling someone to help you, I said softly. This isn't healthy. You need to talk to someone. For the first time, she didn't argue. She just sat there, staring blankly at the floor. Later that day, I contacted a crisis intervention team. Melissa was taken to a psychiatric facility for evaluation. Her behavior deemed a danger to herself and others. It was one of the hardest things I'd ever had to do, but I knew it was the only way to protect her and our children. I filed for an emergency custody order and began the process of ensuring my kids and Bruno would never have to endure this chaos again. The house was quieter now, the weight of Melissa's absence, both a relief and a reminder of the shattered life we'd once shared. But for the first time in months, I felt a glimmer of hope. I was no longer the man Melissa could manipulate. I was stronger now, and I would do whatever it took to rebuild a life of stability and love for me, for my kids, and for Bruno. The silence in the house was deafening after Melissa was taken to the psychiatric facility. The kids asked questions I wasn't entirely ready to answer, but I told them the truth in a way they could understand. Mommy isn't feeling well right now, I explained as we sat around the dining table that evening. She needs help from doctors to feel better. But we're going to be okay. I promise. Ellie clung to my arm, her small voice barely above a whisper. Is she going to come back? I didn't have an answer, not one that felt right. Instead, I hugged her tightly and said, let's focus on us right now, okay? I threw myself into creating a safe, stable environment for the kids. Mornings were for school drop-offs, afternoons were spent helping with homework, and evenings became a time for us to reconnect as a family. I took up cooking, something Melissa had always handled, and found it oddly therapeutic. Bruno, too, seemed to thrive in the newfound calm. His tail wagged more, and he seemed happier, as if sensing the shift in the household. Watching him play in the yard with the kids was a reminder of the simple joys we'd been missing. But even with the progress we were making, the shadows of the past lingered. Every time I passed Melissa's empty side of the closet or found one of her notebooks tucked away, it was a jarring reminder of how quickly things had unraveled. With Melissa in the psychiatric facility, I had to act quickly to secure full custody of the kids. My attorney, a no-nonsense woman named Claire, guided me through the process. Eric, the evidence you've documented is strong, she assured me during one of our meetings. Her erratic behavior, the neglect, the obsession, it all paints a clear picture. The courts will likely side with you, especially with her current state. Still, the process was grueling. Melissa's family intervened, claiming I was trying to alienate her from the children. They were blinded by their love for her, unable or unwilling to see the truth. But with Claire's guidance and the support of professionals who had evaluated Melissa, the court granted me sole custody. It was bittersweet. I had won the right to protect my kids, but the cost was the undeniable fracture of our family. Weeks turned into months. Melissa's treatment continued, and while I received occasional updates from her doctors, I kept my distance. The kids adjusted to their new normal, and so did I, slowly but surely. The house began to feel like a home again, a place of peace rather than tension. One evening, as I sat on the porch watching the sunset, Bruno padded over and rested his head on my knee. I scratched behind his ears, grateful for his silent companionship. He had been a constant through the chaos, a reminder that loyalty and love could still exist. You've been through a lot, buddy, I murmured, but we're going to be okay. It was then that I realized I needed to focus on rebuilding myself, too. For so long, I had been in survival mode, reacting to Melissa's actions, protecting the kids, and putting everyone else first. It was time to rediscover who I was outside of being a husband and father. I started small, jogging in the mornings with Bruno, picking up books I'd always meant to read, reconnecting with old friends. Over time, I began to feel like myself again, but stronger, wiser. The version of me I'd always wanted to be, but never had the chance to fully realize. Opportunities came my way, professionally and personally. My career flourished as I poured my energy into new projects, and I started meeting people who reminded me that not all relationships were built on manipulation and deceit. One of those people was Anna, a single mother I met at a community event. She had a warmth and authenticity that immediately drew me in. We started as friends, but over time, something deeper blossomed. She didn't just accept my past, she understood it. And for the first time in years, I felt like I could let my guard down. Looking back, I realized that Melissa's downfall wasn't just about her or her illness. It was a wake-up call for me, a reminder that I had ignored warning signs, compromised too much, and lost sight of who I was in the name of maintaining a facade. But now, as I sat in the yard watching my kids laugh and chase Bruno, I felt a deep sense of peace. I had come through the fire, scarred but stronger. And in that moment, I knew we were going to be okay. Melissa remained in the psychiatric facility, where her treatment continued to progress slowly. Occasionally, she sent letters, some apologetic, others deflecting blame. I read them, but I never replied. Perhaps one day, she would find her own path to healing. But that was no longer my battle to fight. My battle was over, and I had won, not by defeating Melissa, but by rediscovering myself.